Hello, welcome to the France 24 interview. Well, the 10th anniversary of the September 11th attacks against the United States have been a time for both commemorating and also taking stock of how the world has changed. We've seen a Western-led crusade, or war, if you will, against terror. We've seen major wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and we recently had the death of al-Qaeda founder and leader Osama bin Laden. But we've also seen this decade bring words like Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib into the household vocabulary. It's raised serious questions about whether the anti-terror tactics being used by the West in their pursuit of terrorists have often violated the very democratic principles that they were supposed to uphold. Now, one of the people asking these serious questions is my guest today, and that's Reed Brody. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Reed, you are the legal counsel spokesperson for Human Rights Watch, and you recently came out with a report basically questioning whether or not Bush himself should be tried for abuses, including torture and other things, waterboarding, and a whole range of abuses in this so-called war against terror. You suggest that he and many of his top associates are some of the worst offenders of all, and that they've really trampled on a lot of the principles that American democracy was originally about and have tarnished the reputation of the U.S. along the way. The title of the book is, right now it's in French, Should Bush Be Tried? Doesn't exist in English, but the report does. Should Bush be tried? Why? What evidence do you have to suggest he should 10 years later?
Well, we know that George Bush, Dick Cheney, Donald Rumsfeld, George Tenet approved torture. They approved, President Bush himself says that he approved the waterboarding of 2 al-Qaeda suspects. They set up a vast program of secret prisons in which prisoners were effectively disappeared without any contact with lawyers or the outside world, and a program of renditions by which the CIA sent prisoners to countries like Egypt, like Syria, like Libya, where torture is systematic and where these detainees were, in effect, tortured. So these would be the main reasons.
And let me give the devil's advocate argument here. You'll say, oh, Reed Brody, Human Rights Watch, with his liberal bias against George Bush, just out to get them. This is a terror war. You have to be uncompromising. These softies would let him get away with murder.
Well, first of all, the opposite is actually true. I mean, these policies were presented as ways to make America safer. But objectively, they've made America more vulnerable. We know that the humiliation of Muslim prisoners in Guantanamo, in Abu Ghraib, around the world, has been a cause for recruitment for jihad. We know that as Guantanamo and Abu Ghraib came to symbolize America for millions and millions of Muslims, that the cause of anti-Americanism, of radicalism, prospered. So even
we encourage the terrorists, in other words, by violating, by applying torture and using these methods, we actually encourage what we were trying to prevent.
Exactly. I mean, we know that it is a cause of anti-Americanism. We know that it's a cause of violence. We know from jihadists who have been interrogated by the U.S. government that one of the reasons given by many for having joined was revulsion at the way Muslim prisoners were being treated by the United States.
Dick Cheney, former vice president under George W. Bush, he recently came out with a book in which he said, I have no regrets. If I had to waterboard all over again, if it meant getting the information out of these people, I'd do it all over again.
You know, the evidence is not there that information was gained by torture. I mean, obviously each time, including when Osama bin Laden was killed, there were people that said, well, you see, if we hadn't tortured. But actually, when you look at the facts and when you talk to the interrogators and when you parse through what was asked when, you see that, in fact, the information that led to the capture of Osama bin Laden, the information that led in other events to the foiling of plots did not come from torture. One can never say that torture will never yield good information, but the voice of experience from FBI and interrogators and others is that it's regular law enforcement methods, gaining the confidence of detainees, long-term, patient questioning that leads to actionable intelligence.
Barack Obama, his administration here. He promised a lot of things when he came to office, and one of the main things was he was going to close Guantanamo. Guantanamo's still open. Difficult issue, tough issue. Should we excuse Obama? Has he been tough enough? Has he reneged on his promises?
Obama took some very important steps when he came into office. He stopped torturing, as far as we know. He shut down the CIA prisons. But there's a lot of things that he hasn't done. He hasn't shut down Guantanamo. No prisoner who was tortured by the United States has received any compensation through the courts or otherwise. And most importantly, perhaps, he's let bygones be bygones and has not moved to hold those who committed torture in the previous administration accountable. He hasn't wanted to invest the political capital, and it's a shame. It's a shame for the United States because we can't say that we really turned the page on torture as long as it's treated as a political option rather than a crime. And
do you think there is a way of repairing what I would suppose you would say is a tarnished U.S. reputation when it comes to the world's upholder of human rights, democratic values? Can it be fixed?
I think it can be fixed. I think that if you made an apology, if you compensated those people who had been tortured, if you brought to justice the people who committed, or the architects in particular, of that policy, I think it would go a long way towards convincing people that the United States was on a new footing.
I guess you could argue the diehards are never going to come around. They will have their opinions of the U.S. or whatever happens or is said. What about the recent capture of Osama bin Laden? The manner in which it was carried out, do you think that was a clean operation on a human rights sort of scale?
I think the United States needs to explain fully, and has not yet done that, the exact circumstances, whether or not capture was an option, whether or not bin Laden made any moves to resist. I think the United States needs to explain better what happened in that incident.
And they haven't. We've had partial sort of retellings of the operation as told to them by White House officials, I suppose. In the time we have left, I'd like to sort of shift tracks and look at the situation now, especially in the Arab world, the Arab uprisings. Syria, you were telling me earlier, security forces, Human Rights Watch has some evidence that security forces have physically been going into hospitals there and removing patients. Patients who are there presumably to be treated, and taking them out of the hospital.
That's right. Just yesterday, we put out a report based on conversations that we had with doctors and Red Crescent officials in the Al-Bar Hospital in Homs. There were demonstrations there. People were shot during the demonstrations. It was, first of all, very difficult to get those people to the hospital because there were regime snipers who were preventing people from getting to the hospital. Heroically, many people did get to the hospital, but the security force actually went into the hospital and went in looking for people who had bullet wounds and took out 18 people with bullet wounds, including 5 people who were on the operating table, 2 of whom were unconscious.
You've made this information public.
We've made this public.
Has there been any reaction yet on an official level?
Well, the government is at this point totally impervious to what we and others are saying.
They discount you as...
Well, I think they're just not responding. I mean, they're not even responding to the Arab League and to Turkey and to people who have much more influence.
But what about among the Western countries? We still haven't seen a Libya-style military intervention or sanctions at the UN against Syria. Do you have hope that perhaps reports like this will push for that?
Well, I'm not sure that military intervention is on the table, but the problem with Syria is Russia and China.
They're the blockers.
They are the people who do business with the government, who make profits off the backs of the Syrian people. And unfortunately, countries like India and South Africa and Brazil have also been very slow to come to the side of the Syrian people.
You operate in Russia, though, right? Human Rights Watch operates in Russia.
Yes.
Have you made any representations to the Russian government?
Yes, we have, actually. We've been working a lot around the world. And Russia has changed its tone. They're trying to foster a dialogue in Syria. But at this point, the government has not made one move.
Nothing.
To slow its repression.
Very little time left, unfortunately. Libya, before we go. The recent reports, the documents uncovered by Human Rights Watch as well, in Tripoli, I believe, in where was it, the offices of Gaddafi's former intelligence chief.
Moussa Koussa, the former intelligence chief.
What did they show?
The U.S. was sending, and this is George Bush, CIA, was sending Libyan detainees to Moussa Koussa to be interrogated. The questions were given to Moussa Koussa. This is a regime that is known for torture. The U.S. was sending people there. The current, the new security
extraordinary rendition.
The new security chief of Tripoli was tortured after being sent by the CIA to Colonel Gaddafi.
This will clearly, I suppose, be another count if and when George W. Bush is ever put on trial. 10 seconds. Do you see the possibility of him before an international court? U.S. doesn't even recognize him.
Well, if the U.S. doesn't do it, I think other countries have to. I mean, Bush just canceled a trip to Switzerland, probably because he was afraid of being arrested. Other countries will not be as indulgent for torture as the United States is.
You've heard it from Reed Brody, spokesperson for Human Rights Watch. George W. Bush, if you're listening, you are perhaps a wanted man right now, and you have some serious charges to answer for, charges of torture in the war against terror. Thank you very much for watching the interview here on France 24.